These are the remains of Vedius's bathhouse, once the focal point for his day-to-day business. From here, he would have kept a careful eye on his gladiator school. It was a massive investment geared to enhancing Vedius's political prestige. But first, he had to teach Columbus how to kill. Entering the gladiator training school as a new recruit, Columbus would have been trained in one of several distinct fighting styles, each with its own unique armor and weaponry. These were based on the mythical figures and ancient animes of Rome. From the shield and helmet on his headstone, we know Columbus was a gladiator type called a murmillo. The murmillo had a mythological connection to the sea and meant man-fish or merman. A heavyweight gladiator, the murmillo evolved from the original gladiator, the Samnite. The Samnite short sword, the gladius, inspired the name gladiator. More elaborate specializations soon followed.
Of course, people wanted some variation in the sport, and so developed about 7, 8 standard types of gladiator.
By the 2nd century AD, when Columbus was fighting, the number of different gladiator types had reached its height. Columbus's normal opponent was a Thracian, or Thrax, based on a former enemy of Rome. His distinctive curved blade made him particularly dangerous. Each type had its own strengths and weaknesses, and each could only be paired according to specific rules. The most popular pairing was that between a heavyweight murmillo, or manfish, against the trident and net-wielding retiarius, literally a fisherman. As Columbus advanced through his new and deadly career, he would have faced the retiarius many times. Examining puncture holes in a skull found in the Ephesus gladiator graveyard, Dr. Groschmidt believes he has found a wound pattern that matches that of a retiarius's trident.
One of the most interesting finds we have made here in Ephesus is this skull with a set of wounds. It has 3 holes. 1 hole, 2nd hole, 3rd hole, and so we know it was caused by a trident.
But Groschmidt thinks there is something unusual about this skull. A trident wouldn't have been able to pierce a metal helmet. So this gladiator's head must have been unprotected, or his helmet had fallen off.
We know from experimental archaeologists that gladiator helmets were securely fastened and wouldn't fall off.
The only gladiator who never wore a helmet was the retiarius. Groschmidt therefore concludes that the skull must belong to a retiarius who was killed by his own trident.
The trident entered the skull here, like this.
Columbus would have clashed with the feared retiarius many times. With several victories behind him, he would be a well-known local hero. Even when Columbus survived with his life, he would have not escaped unscathed. Injuries were common, but some of the weapons that inflicted them remained unknown. until now. During his analysis of the Ephesus gladiator bones, Dr. Grossschmidt has found a bizarre wound pattern with 4 symmetrical markings. Located close to a knee joint, it doesn't seem to match any known gladiator weapon. After exhaustive research, he has discovered a rare wall relief that depicts the unusual weapon he believes dealt the blow. Long thought by historians to have been used only in religious ceremonies, almost nothing is known about this strange cult weapon called a quadrant.
Until now, archaeologists have always interpreted this as a kind of cult object. But with the evidence of these 4 holes, we could prove that it was a weapon. And that was a sensational find for the archaeologists.
Grossschmidt's find proves for the first time that it was used in the arena as a gladiator weapon. Any gladiator on the receiving end of this blow would have been extremely lucky to have escaped without permanent injury. But incredibly, Grossschmidt believes gladiators survive terrible wounds on a regular basis. Conducting X-rays on his bone samples, Grossschmidt has found evidence of the excellent standard of medical care gladiators received. Examining the results on his computer, he finds the same story repeated again and again. Fractures that have healed, broken bones that have been carefully reset.
With the use of digital X-raying, we can see that the bone fractures were set. This proves they received physiotherapy. It's comparable to today's medical standards.
After several years fighting, a gladiator like Columbus would be close to the end of his contract. His final games would be the high point of his career, his last chance to retire as a wealthy champion or die in the attempt.
Successful gladiators had their images and names put on products, just the way athletes today. We're talking about an absolutely enormous social and cultural phenomenon in the Roman world.
Vedius also had a lot at stake in the forthcoming games. If his star performer, Columbus, failed to deliver, his hopes of using the games to increase his family's political influence would come to nothing.
Each aristocratic family, when they're elected to public office in a provincial town, has to put on a show. And that show will last the family as symbolic capital for 5 years. So this is their one chance to get prestige.
The fates of Columbus and Vedius were entwined. Once the Vedius family's turn came to host the games, massive preparations would begin, and an army of publicists, caterers, specialist animal trappers, legal officials, and bookmakers would spring into action. As the big day drew nearer, weaponsmiths and armorers worked overtime to supply the games. The gladiators' training reached fever pitch.